My name is Rebecca. I'm 32 years old. And the night my parents told me I was no longer their daughter, I understood what it meant to be truly alone. It wasn't sudden. I had spent my whole life trying to win their approval, straight A's, trophies, business plans scribbled in the margins of my notebooks. None of it mattered. From the day my younger brother Kieran was born, I had been the shadow. He was the heir. I was a mistake they never wanted. Still, I believed I could change their minds. Until I fell in love. Thomas wasn't rich. He didn't come from a family with connections. He was kind, hardworking, and mine. To me, he was everything. To them, he was nothing. You had one duty, my mother hissed, standing in her pearls and perfect smile. To marry well. To strengthen this family. Instead, you chose love. My father's verdict was colder. From this day forward, we have no daughter. That night, they erased me. My photos disappeared from the walls. My seat at the table was gone. Even the dog I had raised since a puppy was pulled back when I reached for him. I walked out of that house with nothing, no inheritance, no family, no safety net. Just man they despised at my side. We rented a one-bedroom apartment with peeling paint and a second-hand couch. I counted coins at the grocery store. He worked nights. I worked days. There were times I thought I might break. But every morning, as I woke in that small, cold room, one thought burned in me. I will prove them wrong. One day, they will see what they threw away. Before I go on, let me ask you something. Have you ever been cut out by the very people who were supposed to love you the most? Have you ever been told you were worthless, only to feel that fire inside you spark instead of die? Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And if this story struck a chord, hit subscribe, like the video, and stay with me because this is the story of how being disowned became the greatest weapon I ever held. When I try to remember the moment I learned I wasn't the child they wanted, I see a staircase and a glass of Chardonnay. I'm 3, maybe 4. I'm sitting on the carpeted steps with my knees pulled to my chest, listening to my mother's friends laugh in our living room. Someone asks, "Will you try again?" My mother laughs lightly, like a spoon against crystal. Of course! We were hoping for a boy. The women murmur the way people do around a secret. Warm, complicit, harmless to them and radioactive to me. I stare at my socks and count the threads. I don't cry. I learn. 3 months later, a black and white sonogram replaces my crayon drawing on the fridge. My father calls me into the kitchen, taps the magnet with pride, and says, "You'll have a little brother, Rebecca." The drawing, a lopsided house with a yellow window, slides down the stainless steel and lands on the tile. No one picks it up. I do. I press it flat and put it in a drawer in my room. It's the first time I catalog a loss. Kieran arrives to fireworks. Not literal ones, but that's how it felt. Sparks in every room, congratulations in every doorway, casseroles in every dish that had ever felt lonely in our cabinets. My mother blooms. My father learns softness, the kind he never used around me. People bring blue balloons and say, "The heir at last." I become the child who hands out napkins and is told to be careful near the bassinet. "Be quiet, Rebecca, your brother is sleeping." "Hands off, Rebecca, that's Kieran's toy. Why can't you be patient like him?" At 5, I line up my shoes on the mat with perfect precision, hoping order might be mistaken for virtue. At 6, I fold dish towels into exact squares. At 7, I memorize multiplication tables 2 grades ahead and slide the worksheet under my mother's coffee cup like a petition. She glances at it, smiles a half smile, and says, "Good girl," the way people talk to obedient dogs. School becomes my country. Teachers notice me the way sunlight notices a clean window. I raise my hand, I win spelling bees, I bring home A's like seashells after a good tide. The shells clatter into a glass jar on my desk. My mother calls them sweet. My father calls them nice. Kieran scores a goal at soccer and earns a steak dinner. Birthdays teach me arithmetic of worth. His are parades, bounce houses inflated in the backyard, hired magicians, a cake with a frosting stadium. Mine are combined celebrations for convenience, paper plates from last year, candles that sputter out because someone left the window open. I learned to clap for him and to blow my own candles quickly so the smoke doesn't set off the fire alarm that always overreacts. At 10, I won a district science fair with a project about how yeast behaves in different sugars. I write a careful speech on index cards and practice in the mirror, tucking stray hair behind my ear the way news anchors do. On the day of the ceremony, I look out from the stage. Other parents hold up phones. Mine aren't there. I hear later that Kieran had a tennis tournament across town. He didn't win that day. They brought him ice cream anyway. The house trains me. It has rules and routes like a train map only I can see. Don't ask for seconds when guests are over. Don't interrupt your father's reading. Don't be in photos unless someone invites you into the frame. My mother edits albums like a museum curator. The pictures are always balanced. Kieran at the center, my parents at his shoulders, me at the edge if the composition calls for family rather than son. I become useful. I pack Kieran's lunch when mom forgets. I iron his shirt on the morning of school pictures when dad's on a call. When people praise me, what a helpful big sister. It feels like applause after the show has ended and the theater is being cleaned. The double standard is a cathedral we live in. Kieran forgets his homework. The teacher didn't explain it well. I misplace a permission slip, irresponsible, and we expected better. When he lies about breaking the porch light, my father calls it boyish. When I tell the truth about borrowing my mother's scarf, she calls it manipulative, as if honesty were a weapon I brandished to make her look kind. You might think I became bitter. I didn't. Not then. I built a ledger. I wrote things down in my mind. Debits, skipped recitals, missed parent-teacher nights, hugs rationed like wartime sugar. Credits, secret kindnesses from strangers, a librarian who saved me the new releases, a math teacher who said I had an engine for a mind. The ledger kept me sane. It kept me honest about them and about myself. There were tender moments, small as coins but real. My father once took me to the hardware store alone. He let me choose a tiny hammer from a bin of child-sized tools. For your projects, he said, like he believed I'd build something. I kept that hammer in a shoebox under my bed. When the house was loud brunches, business partners, laughter that scraped, I would hold the hammer and imagine nails biting into lumber, a structure rising under my hands that no one could repossess. I learned money early, not the way Kieran did, through allowance negotiations and teaching moments about stocks, but through the quiet math of scarcity. I started a lemonade stand with a hand-lettered sign and tracked expenses on scrap paper, lemons, sugar, cups, ice. Profit thrilled me not because I could buy anything with it, but because the numbers proved I existed. At 13, I began tutoring younger kids in algebra, then geography. Parents paid me in envelopes with my name on them. Seeing my name spelled correctly felt like someone pronouncing my life. By 14, I kept a notebook of ideas, a bakery with rosemary bread and sturdy mugs, a Thrift Plus shop where high-quality second-hand clothes were tailored on-site, a tiny cafe that turned into a book club after hours. I didn't know how any of it would work. I drew arrows and flowcharts anyway. When my mother found the notebook, she flipped through it like a magazine and said, "Cute. But remember your duty." Duty meant marriage. Marriage meant leverage. Leverage meant my heart was negotiable. That winter, I played a violin solo at the holiday concert. I practiced until my fingers ached and my shoulder burned. The piece was Vivaldi, nimble as frost. I scanned the auditorium before the performance and found my parents in the fourth row, Kieran between them with arms crossed, bored. When I finished, the applause rose and fell like winter rain. I looked for my mother's eyes. She was already standing up to beat the parking lot traffic. That night, the house smelled like pine and dish soap. I lay awake and realized I had no more corners to turn inside their maze. Kieran grew handsome and easy, the way people do when the world has been adjusted to their height. He learned to hold eye contact and to say the right thing at the right time. He learned that consequences bend. At 16, he dented the car and my father slapped his back and called it a lesson. At 16, I came home 10 minutes late and my mother took my phone for a week and said, "We have standards, Rebecca." I don't blame him for being the sun they revolved around. Suns don't apologize for gravity. But I built a ship. The ship was made of small decisions. I saved the tutoring money instead of buying the boots everyone had. I said yes to extra credit. I learned to read contracts for fun. I volunteered at a Saturday market and asked the owner questions about permits and suppliers until he let me help tally end-of-day receipts. I watched people, not just what they wanted, but how they paid for it, how they justified it to themselves, how they returned when they felt seen. Sometimes my aunt would lean in at family gatherings, the ones where I refilled glasses and counted how often my name was used in sentences. She'd whisper, "You're the steady one," like it was both compliment and curse. I wore it like armor. Steady doesn't sparkle. Steady doesn't trend. Steady endures. On my 15th birthday, my parents gave me a charm bracelet with a tiny gold key on it. "To your future," my mother said. I smiled and thanked them. Later, in my room, I held the key up to the light and wondered what door it was supposed to open and whose house it belonged to. I tucked it into the same shoebox as the hammer. A key and a hammer, entry and force. I didn't understand then how much I'd need both. Senior year, college brochures arrived like fan mail. I circled business programs and scholarships. My father circled 2 schools whose alumni lists looked useful. "We'll see," he said, "the way kings do in movies, benevolent and final." My mother cut out an engagement announcement from the paper, 2 families joined, last names italicized like brand mergers, and left it on my desk with a sticky note. "This is what doing it right looks like." I told myself a story to stay kind. Maybe they were sick with fear. Maybe loving a daughter felt dangerous in a world that rewarded sons. Maybe they were protecting me the only way they knew, by turning me into currency. It's easier to forgive people when you invent their reasons. But I also told myself another story, truer, sharper. I had been born into a house that measured value with a scale I did not fit. If I wanted a different outcome, I would have to build a different scale. By the time Kieran graduated, the photo on the mantle showed 3 people in bright light, arms around each other, faces tilted toward promise. My picture from the Honor Society ceremony sat in a hallway frame near the thermostat, where no one lingered. On the morning of his graduation party, my mother called me into the dining room and asked me to polish the silver. I did it. I did it well. Then I went upstairs and added a new line to my notebook. "If they won't see you, build something they can't ignore." It would take years to translate that sentence into a plan, and longer still to turn the plan into a life. But the architecture of my resolve began in that house, on staircases where I learned to listen, in kitchens where my drawings slid to the floor, in living rooms where the camera never called my name. People ask when I became strong. Strength is a sediment. It settles slowly until one day the river has a new bed. All of this is why, when love finally came, real, ordinary, unleveraged love, I recognized it as mine. Not a line item on someone else's ledger. Not an alliance to balance a portfolio. A life I could choose without asking permission. That choice would be the spark. But the tinder, the dry, patient, necessary tinder, was childhood. And if you're wondering whether they ever noticed the girl on the stairs who stopped asking to be chosen, they did. Just not in time. By the time I turned 18, I had already decided that my parents' approval was a currency I would never afford. So I stopped chasing it. Instead, I chased something else, freedom. I filled out scholarship forms like someone drowning reaching for air. I wrote essays about resilience, about ambition, about being the first in my family to attend college on my own merit, even though I knew those words would never make it onto our mantelpiece. When the acceptance letter arrived with the words "full scholarship" printed across the top, I held the envelope in my hands and cried. Not because my parents would be proud, but because for once I didn't need them. I chose business administration. Practical, sharp, a discipline that could one day become the scaffolding for the life I was determined to build. The irony? It was the same field my father had studied, but when I announced my major at dinner, he only said, "Don't waste time. Your brother will handle the family assets. Your future lies elsewhere." Elsewhere, as it turned out, meant marriage. That year, my parents had entered into a new business venture with another prominent family in our town, the Devereaux. They were wealthy, established, and obsessed with appearances. Their son, Nathan, was a polished young man with slicked back hair and a smile that never reached his eyes. To my parents, he was perfect. To me, he was a cage. I remember the night they told me. We were sitting in the dining room, the chandelier throwing golden light over crystal glasses. My mother leaned forward, her pearls clicking against the table as she said, "Rebecca, you're a smart girl. You know this is how families grow stronger. A marriage between you and Nathan would secure everything. Everything. That word meant their business, their legacy, their reputation. Not my happiness. Not my heart." I nodded politely, the way I had learned to do as a child, but inside, I felt a storm brewing. College was my sanctuary. The campus was alive in a way my parents' house had never been. Students debated in hallways, ideas clashed and merged. The library smelled like paper and possibility. For the first time, I wasn't Rebecca the daughter. I was Rebecca, period. And then I met Thomas. He wasn't from a wealthy family. He worked nights at a cafe near campus to cover what his partial scholarship didn't. His clothes were simple, his laugh unpolished, his eyes brighter than anything money could buy. He studied engineering, not because it would make him rich, but because he wanted to build things that lasted. Bridges, roads, structures that connected people instead of trapping them. We met in the library, over a stack of economics textbooks. He dropped his pen, I picked it up, and somehow an hour later we were still talking. About everything. About nothing. About the kind of futures we wanted, the kind that weren't written by anyone else's hand. With Thomas, I didn't feel like an investment. I didn't feel like an obligation. I felt human. Seen. Chosen. Weeks turned into months. We studied together, walked home under lamplight, shared late-night ramen in his tiny apartment with peeling linoleum floors. I loved those floors more than any polished marble in my parents' house. Because they were real. Because they were ours. The more I fell in love, the more I dreaded the life my parents were planning for me. Phone calls with home became negotiations. My mother reminding me that Nathan Devereaux would wait until you're ready. My father dropping hints about dowries and partnerships. I learned to mute the phone and let their voices fade into background noise. But one weekend, when I brought Thomas to meet them, thinking, foolishly, that if they saw how good he was, they might reconsider, the truth sharpened into something I could never unsee. My father's face hardened the moment Thomas extended his hand. My mother's smile was paper-thin. Nathan had been invited that night too, seated across the table in a tailored suit, smirking like the outcome was already decided. When Thomas left, my parents closed the door and turned to me. "Rebecca," my father said, his voice flat as stone, "you are not going to throw away your future for some nobody. This isn't the 19th century, but marriages still matter. They are strategy. You will do what's expected." That was the moment the fire inside me finally roared. "No," I said. Just one word, but it was the loudest I had ever spoken in that house. My mother's face flushed with anger. "You're being childish. Do you understand what you're risking?" "Yes," I answered. "My soul, my happiness, my life. And it's not yours to barter." The argument that followed was volcanic. Years of silence, of swallowed disappointment, of being invisible, it all erupted. Words I had rehearsed in my head for over a decade spilled out in seconds. They shouted, I shouted louder. And when my father finally slammed his fist on the table and declared, "If you marry him, you are no longer our daughter," I didn't flinch. I walked upstairs, packed my things into 2 suitcases, and left before the echoes of his words faded. That night, I moved into Thomas's apartment with the peeling linoleum and the tiny kitchen. It wasn't much, but it was home. We had no inheritance, no safety net, no blessing. What we did have was love, stubborn and defiant, the kind that didn't calculate return on investment. I chose him. And in choosing him, I chose myself. People say marrying for love is naive, outdated. But to me, marrying for calculation felt like a relic of the past, chains disguised as pearls, cages disguised as mansions. I wanted no part of it. And if walking away made me an exile, then I would wear exile like a crown. Because freedom, even fragile and uncertain, was worth more than any empire built on sacrifice. By the time Thomas and I turned 25, life wasn't perfect, but it was ours. We weren't rich, not even close. But we were no longer scraping by on coins and midnight noodles. Thomas had landed a junior engineering job at a construction firm, the kind of work that gave him hard hands and soft eyes when he came home tired. I worked as an analyst at a mid-sized marketing agency, finally using the business degree I had fought so hard to earn. We had a small apartment with new paint on the walls, furniture we'd bought ourselves, and a balcony where we could sit on summer evenings with a glass of cheap wine and laugh about everything we thought we'd never survive. We weren't living a fairy tale. We were living our best life, which is why the envelope surprised me. It arrived one Thursday afternoon, tucked between utility bills and a coupon flyer. The handwriting on the front was familiar, my Aunt Clara's, looping and elegant. Inside was an invitation, a family celebration at her house, an anniversary party with food and music, and all the Whitmores gathered together. I stared at the card for a long time, trying to decide what I felt. Clara was my father's sister, the one relative who had never fully turned her back on me. She sent Christmas cards even after my parents disowned me. She mailed me a cookbook when she heard I liked to bake. And now she wanted me there. Thomas looked at the card over my shoulder. "Do you want to go?" he asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "It feels like a trap." "Maybe it's not," he said gently. "Maybe she just misses you." So we went. The night of the party, I wore a simple navy dress and the charm bracelet my parents had given me on my 15th birthday, the one with the tiny golden key. Not because I wanted them to notice, but because I wanted to remind myself that I still carried pieces of that house, whether they acknowledged me or not. Clara's home was warm, lit with candles and laughter. The smell of roasted chicken and fresh bread wrapped around us as we stepped inside. For a moment, I felt almost normal, like I was walking into the kind of family gathering I had always wished for. Then I saw them. My parents, standing near the fireplace, glasses of wine in hand, glowing with the kind of charm they saved for public appearances. And next to them, Kieran, my brother, dressed in a tailored suit, shaking hands, smiling for photos, the golden child they had always wanted. I froze. The air seemed to thicken. Thomas squeezed my hand, steadying me. "We don't have to stay," he whispered. "No," I said. "We're already here." I won't hide. We moved through the crowd, greeting Clara, who hugged me tightly and whispered, "I'm so glad you came." Her warmth was real. I clung to it like a life raft. But then the moment came. The kind of moment that etches itself into your bones. Someone, a cousin, I think, called out across the room, "Oh, Mrs. Whitmore, I didn't know Rebecca would be here tonight." How wonderful, the whole family together. The room seemed to tilt. My mother's smile stiffened. She turned her head slowly, her eyes brushing past me as if I were a piece of furniture. Then she laughed lightly and said, "Oh, you must be mistaken. We have only one child. Only one child." The words dropped like shards of glass. Conversations around us faltered. Glasses hovered midair. Even Kieran glanced away, uncomfortable. The cousin stammered, looking between me and my mother, confused. Thomas's grip on my hand tightened, his knuckles white. I felt my face burn, but not with shame, with fury. My mother looked right at me and chose denial. She could have said nothing. She could have brushed it off. Instead, she erased me in front of everyone. "I'm right here," I said, my voice sharp enough to cut through the silence. Whether you want to admit it or not. For a moment, no one moved. The air itself seemed afraid to breathe. My father cleared his throat, murmured something about needing to check on the caterer, and stepped away like a coward. My mother simply turned her back. It was Clara who saved me. She put an arm around me, kissed my cheek, and said loudly, "Yes, this is my niece Rebecca, and I'm proud she's here tonight." Her voice was steel wrapped in velvet, and I could have wept from gratitude. But the damage was done. Everyone in that room knew the truth now, not just that my parents had disowned me, but that they were willing to erase me even when I stood right in front of them. We didn't stay long. I hugged Clara goodbye, thanked her for inviting me, and walked out with Thomas into the cool night air. On the drive home, I stared out the window, watching the lights blur into streaks. "Do you know what hurts the most?" I whispered. "It's not that they don't love me. It's that they pretend I never existed. Thomas reached over, resting his hand on mine. Then we'll build a life so undeniable, Rebecca, that no one will ever be able to pretend again. I nodded, the fire inside me reigniting. My mother could erase me from her sentences. My father could vanish when things got uncomfortable. Kieran could keep shining in the spotlight they handed him. But I was still here. And one day, they would regret not seeing me. After that night at Clara's house, something inside me snapped into place. My mother's words, "We have only one child," burned like acid, but they also hardened into steel. If they wanted me invisible, I would build a life so radiant it would blind them. I threw myself into work. Not just the 9-to-5 at the agency, though I rose quickly there, earning praise from clients for my sharp instincts and tireless drive. What set me apart was what I did after hours. Every evening, after dinner with Thomas in our tiny kitchen, I would open my notebook, the same battered one that had followed me since childhood, and sketch new plans. Markets to research, products to test, services people didn't even know they needed yet. I started small. A weekend pop-up shop with handcrafted candles. A digital store selling curated gift boxes sourced from local artisans. Each venture taught me something about supply chains, about margins, about how branding is less about logos and more about telling the right story. For every failure, I wrote notes. For every success, I reinvested. Thomas stood by me the whole way. He handled spreadsheets when my eyes blurred from exhaustion. He made late-night coffee runs. And when self-doubt whispered that I was still the unwanted daughter, he reminded me, "Rebecca, you've already survived worse. This you can master." And slowly I did. By 28, I had registered my first official company, Hammer and Amp, Key Goods. I named it after the objects I had kept since childhood, the little hammer from my father, the golden key from my mother. Symbols of the two forces that had shaped me, entry and resistance. Force and possibility. At first, Hammer and Amp, Key was just candles and gift boxes. Then it grew into home goods, into curated lifestyle collections, into an online brand that customers trusted because it felt personal. I answered emails myself at midnight, signed every handwritten thank you card, remembered customers' names. Where my parents' empire was polished but cold, mine was raw but human. And it worked. Orders doubled, then tripled. I hired my first 2 employees, then 10. We rented a warehouse space, then bought it. Investors came knocking, but I was careful. I had watched Kieran rise on borrowed money and easy credit. I refused to repeat his mistakes. By 30, Hammer and Amp, Key was profitable, sustainable, and expanding into new markets. Magazines called me a rising star in independent business. Podcasts invited me to share my story. But I never told them the whole truth. I never said that behind every sleepless night was the ghost of a mother who pretended I didn't exist. The more successful I became, the louder the contrast grew. My family still paraded Kieran in public as their golden heir, but cracks were showing. His company borrowed too heavily, expanded too fast, promised too much. Whispers of debt and bad deals followed him like shadows. Meanwhile, my name was appearing in the very same circles my parents once reserved for him. Not as Rebecca, their daughter, but as Rebecca Whitmore, CEO. I didn't chase their approval anymore. I didn't need it. But part of me savored the irony. The girl they erased had built something impossible to ignore. It should have been an ordinary Wednesday. I was in the warehouse turned HQ by 9, taste testing a new cedar blend, signing off on Q2 hires, and reviewing a supplier contract that pretended net. 30 could stretch to net. 75 if you didn't read the fine print. The place hummed. Tape guns, printers, laughter. The warm music of a company that knows what it's doing. At 11:42, my assistant buzzed. "Rebecca, your parents are here. And Kieran." For a heartbeat, every sound in the building seemed to lean toward that sentence. "Conference room B," I said, and felt my pulse steady the way it does before a race you've already trained for. They were waiting when I pushed open the glass door. My mother in pearls, but the clasp sat crooked. My father in a navy suit, but the shoulders drooped. Kieran, tailored, expensive, restless, watched the table like it might swallow him. Rebecca, my father began, voice pitched for civility. Thank you for seeing us. I didn't agree to see you, I said, taking my seat at the head. I agreed to hear the pitch. Kieran blinked. Pitch? This is a business, I said evenly. You came to ask for something. That makes this a pitch. A silence flared and died. Then the story tumbled out, not as confession, but as arithmetic. Devereaux Capital had extended 2 lines of credit. Sales missed projections. A second, smaller fund stepped in with a bridge at a rate that looked like kindness until you multiplied it by time. Payables slipped. Vendors filed liens. The bank, once a family friend, tightened covenants. Then came the notice. Cure period expired. 30 days gone. Another letter followed, colder, intent to accelerate. My mother dabbed at a tear that didn't fall. People are talking, she whispered, as if gossip were the worst of their wounds. What do you want? I asked, not unkindly, just precisely. My father slid a leather folder across the table. Inside, a proposed family solution. I read it without touching the pages. They wanted a cash injection, 7 figures, to stop the acceleration and pay the loudest lien holders. In return, they offered me a board seat and 12% equity in a company sinking under paper promises. The house, the one that never leaves the bloodline, would be pledged as collateral temporarily. They used the word bridge 5 times and family 7. You rehearsed this, I said. We discussed it, my father corrected. With whom? I asked. The lawyers, he said, and the word tasted wrong in his mouth. My mother leaned forward, searching my face for the girl she'd trained to be useful. Rebecca, it's not just about us. There are employees, families. If you fail, I said softly, they will find better captains. Color rose in Kieran's cheeks. You enjoy this, don't you? I turned to him. No, I enjoy competent math. He scoffed, then reached for swagger and found only air. Look, we mistimed the river road build-out. Supply chain got weird. Everyone took a hit. You took a loan against future receivables you didn't have, I said. Then you marketed a render as a reality, and you bought a car no ledger could justify. He started to speak. I shook my head. I read the filings, Kieran. Public records are a generous teacher. My father straightened. Enough accounting. The point is, we're here. We've put pride aside. We need your help. There it was, the verb they'd never used with me. Need. I let it sit between us. In that pause, I saw the road that had brought them, the voicemail from a lender that didn't get returned, the meeting where the Devereaux stopped smiling, the breakfast where my mother rehearsed an apology and tasted metal, the drive to my address with silence buckled in every seat. I saw my Aunt Clara's hand on my mother's wrist saying, go. She'll hear you if no one else will. I saw the front steps of Hammer and Anth, Key, the company they once swore would amount to nothing, rising like a verdict they had to climb. What exactly are you offering? I asked, tapping the folder, aside from a chair in a burning room. My father bristled. A chance to show you belong in this family's business. I don't, I said. I built my own. My mother tried a softer door. Rebecca, I should have called. I should have, her throat closed. Should have, I agreed. But you didn't. Kieran drummed a finger on the table, a nervous tick I remembered from childhood. Fine, he said too loudly. Name your price. I tilted my head. For what? For the cash, he said. For the rescue. I offered him a small smile that wasn't one. I don't do rescues. I do acquisitions. The room shifted. My father's eyes narrowed. Acquisitions. Control changes hands when someone proves they deserve it, I said. You taught me that. My mother's hand fluttered to her pearls. You can't mean 51%, my father said, scoffing. Impossible. 51 is charity, I replied. Given the debt stack, it should be more. Kieran half rose from his chair. Over my dead sit, my father said, not looking at him. The old choreography, command and compliance, played itself one last time. I watched it with the detached attention of a person revisiting a childhood street and finding every tree shorter. Here's the truth, I said, sliding the leather folder back. You don't need cash. You need time. But time is what your lenders are no longer selling. Even if I wired the money today, your habits would devour it by autumn. My father's mouth thinned. So this is punishment. No, I said. This is math dressed as mercy. I stood and walked to the window. Below us, pallets moved, labels printed, a forklift beeped. The company I built breathed all the way to the loading dock. I turned back. You taught the world I didn't exist. You deleted me from photos, from speeches, from your definition of family. You cut me out, and then you cut out the part of yourselves that knows how to ask for help before it's too late. Now you come here with your folder and your 7 words for family, not because you've remembered me, but because you've run out of other doors. It doesn't have to be like this, my mother whispered. It already is, I said. My father looked at the table, and when he lifted his head, the last of the oak had gone from his posture. What would you do, he asked, the question ragged, if it were yours? Sell River Road while it still has a buyer, I said without hesitation. Pay Rosa first. She kept you supplied when others didn't. Renegotiate the Devereaux paper. They'll prefer haircut to headlines. Close the showroom that bleeds cash because the espresso machine is prettier than the margins. And put your son in a role that doesn't let him sign anything. Kieran laughed, brittle. Head of morale? Head of learning, I said. If he wants it. My mother stared at me as if seeing a shape in a painting that had always been there. You already have a plan. I met her eyes. I had a plan at 15. The clock on the wall ticked. Down the hall someone cheered. A big order must have cleared. The sound felt like weather changing. My father exhaled. And if we agree to an acquisition, then we do it cleanly, I said. Through a separate entity. No theatrics. Your employees get stability. Your vendors get paid on a schedule they can believe. You keep your house. My mother's head jerked if and only if you stop mortgaging it to prop up ego. You get seats on an advisory board with no voting rights. You get to say we learned. That's the dignity on offer. And you, my father asked, voice small. What do you get, Rebecca? Ownership, I said. And peace. Kieran's eyes flashed. This is revenge. No, I said, and let the word be gentle. Revenge is loud and short. This is correction. Quiet and long. My mother's composure finally cracked. I was cruel, she said, each word pulled through thorns. I thought I was being strategic. We believed we were protecting the family, and I erased my daughter. She pressed her palm flat to the table as if testing whether it would hold. Please, Rebecca. The girl inside me, the one with the index cards and the empty seat in the audience, lifted her head. I didn't hug my mother. I didn't reach for her hand. But I didn't turn away either. I'll have council send terms by end of week, I said. If you accept them, we move quickly. If you don't, you'll still be out of time. Either way, this ends. My father nodded slowly once. The old king without a crown. Thank you, he said, and it sounded like a language he hadn't spoken in years. They rose. Kieran hesitated at the door. Why help us at all? He asked, anger drained to curiosity. I thought of my team, of Rosa, of Leon, of every person who'd taught me the shape of a ledger and the weight of a promise. Because your collapse would crush people who never erased me, I said. And because I am not the story you wrote. They left the room together, smaller than they had arrived. I stood alone for a moment, listening to the building breathe. Then I opened my laptop and drafted the email I'd been composing in my head for months. Subject, terms. I wrote clearly. No gloating. No nicked edges. Just structure and consequence and a path out that didn't reward the worst of us. When I hit send, my hands shook not with rage this time, but with relief so deep it felt like sleep after a decade awake. I went back out to the floor. My team looked up, faces bright with a question they didn't ask. I smiled. Big week, I said. Let's ship. By dusk, the cedar test had a green light, payroll ran clean, and the warehouse smelled like a forest after rain. I stood by the loading dock and watched a truck door slide down on a pallet stacked with boxes stamped with our mark. They thought disowning me would end me. It trained me. They thought I'd come crawling. I arrived standing. They knocked at my door because theirs had closed. I opened mine, but not to go back. To let the future in.